needed to raise U.S. combat strength in Vietnam to more than 60,000 troops. Allied forces from Korea and Australia would be added as a sign of international support. There were restrictions on how the U.S. commander in Vietnam, General Westmoreland, would be able to use the troops he had been given. They were to operate only inside clearly defined enclaves around their bases. To Westmoreland's dismay, all operations were to be strictly defensive. The American policy of defending enclaves would soon be severely tested by the Viet Cong. The guerrillas were planning to unleash a massive offensive. The campaign was designed to inflict the final blows on the tottering South Vietnamese state. The storm broke on May 11th with a full-scale assault by 2,500 Viet Cong troops on Song Bay, a provincial capital. After fierce battles in and around the town, the Viet Cong withdrew, but only after holding Song Bay for nearly 2 days. The Viet Cong assault on Song Bay was followed by a series of attacks to within a few miles of Saigon. Meanwhile, in the Central Highlands, U.S. intelligence had detected all the elements of the North Vietnamese Army's 325th Division and signs that the 304th was on its way. There was intense Viet Cong activity in all the central provinces, with a big Viet Cong victory near Ba Gia. On June 10, 1965, at Dong Xoa, a South Vietnamese Army district headquarters and U.S. Special Forces camp was overrun by a full regiment. It was abandoned only after frantic American air attacks. The sheer scale of the Viet Cong's new offensive had far surpassed anything that either the South Vietnamese Army or the Americans had anticipated. The government's best and most mobile battalions had been shattered. The disaster was followed by political upheaval. A faction of young military officers installed Air Vice Marshal Key as Prime Minister and General Nguyen Van Thieu as President, openly restoring military government. After the Viet Cong's May offensive, it was plain to the Americans that enemy numbers were much higher than they had thought. That meant far more U.S. troops would be needed to hold the line. Estimates of just how many kept rising until on June 7, 1965, General Westmoreland asked Washington for 200,000 men. While Westmoreland was waiting for the president's decision, he was given new powers to use the troops he already had more aggressively. He would no longer have to confine his men to defensive enclaves, but could go out and attack the enemy. On June 27, 1965, General Westmoreland launched the first purely offensive operation by American ground forces in Vietnam. It was a sweep into NLF territory just northwest of Saigon. A month after the start of offensive operations, President Johnson announced that more troops would be sent to Vietnam. He was still playing down the scale of the commitment, but had already decided to deploy the 200,000 men he had been asked for. The following day, the first troops of the big buildup arrived in Vietnam. The men were a battalion of the 101st Airborne Division. By this time, there was no longer any doubt about just what their mission would be. They were to find the Viet Cong's main force military units and destroy them on the battlefield. As the buildup of American forces in Vietnam went on, the chances they would be attacked grew by the day. On August 5th, NLF sappers penetrated an oil storage depot near Da Nang and blew up 2 million gallons of fuel. There had been sniping and mortar attacks too, but the real fear was of a large-scale infantry assault overrunning an American installation. What the Americans needed was accurate and timely intelligence about what the enemy intended to do. It came when a deserter from the 1st Viet Cong Regiment, a force nearly 2,000 strong, told his captors that his unit was planning to hit the Marine base at Chu Lai. The Marines quickly planned a full-scale operation to trap the Viet Cong regiment in its assembly area. The operation was planned in the strictest secrecy. Codenamed Operation Starlight, and deploying 4,000 troops, it would be the first American regimental-sized battle since the war in Korea. The Marine base at Chu Lai was 15 miles from the village complex of Van Tuong. Between the Tra Bong River, the elevation known as Hill 43, and the Phuoc Tuan Peninsula was a fortified Viet Cong base area. There, the 1st Viet Cong Regiment, made up of the 60th and 80th Battalions, had assembled for the attack on Chu Lai. On August 17, 1965, Company M of the 3rd Battalion, 3rd Marines, took up a blocking position on the Tra Bong River. Next morning, the rest of the battalion made an amphibious landing, while 3 more companies were inserted at landing zones Red, White, and Blue. The Marines pushed on from LZ's Red and White, but around Hill 43, near LZ Blue, the entire Viet Cong 60th Battalion was dug in, and there was a fierce battle before the hill was taken. There was also heavy Viet Cong resistance near the hamlet the Americans called A Chuang Tu. But after reinforcement, the Marines succeeded in squeezing the Viet Cong from 3 sides, trapping them with their backs to the sea. In Operation Starlight, it was the early battles that proved the heaviest. The first 2 companies in action took almost 1/3 casualties. 29 were dead and many wounded, but the Marines had claimed nearly 300 Viet Cong killed. The next 5 days involved only small-scale actions. As the Marines advanced, the Viet Cong, numbed by the shattering naval, artillery, and air bombardments, fought delaying actions as they tried to disengage. In support of the attacking infantry, Marine guns at the Chu Lai base alone fired over 3,000 rounds. The ships fired another 1,500. Marine air support was so effective that at times aircraft were dropping their bombs within 200 feet of their own troops. At the end of the operation, nearly 700 Viet Cong were claimed as dead. The Marines had lost 45 dead and more than 200 wounded in the battle. For the United States Marines, Operation Starlight had been a resounding victory. In the first major battle of the war, the guerrillas had been defeated on their own territory and by inexperienced troops. The classic U.S. military doctrine had worked exactly as it was supposed to. The enemy had been found, fixed in position, and then destroyed with massive firepower. The Marines moved fast to take advantage of their victory in Operation Starlight. They launched a series of attacks against NLF concentrations along the coast. Meanwhile, General Westmoreland's attention shifted to the Central Highlands. There, the threat was posed not by the Viet Cong guerrillas, but by the newly arrived troops of the North Vietnamese Army. It was against these professional and highly trained regiments that the Americans would fight their next major battle.